It's time to talk about the Masonic conspiracy. Hello, my friends. I have always been interested in the history of Freemasonry, and today I will tell you what I know myself. Who the Freemasons are, where they came from, and in general what we know about them. Does the Masonic conspiracy exist at all? So today we are talking about the Freemasons. In legal terms, Freemasonry is a closed society where only initiated people are allowed. They have their own code of honor, rules, regulations for meetings, rituals, etc. When looking at the history of the Freemasons, we can see that it is a religious and political movement that started to take form in modern times. It is an international organization that is kept secret with mystical rites with the goals of moral improvement. This means that the Freemasons would gather in their lodges to talk about philosophy and the world order. How to know yourself and how to know God. However, the Freemasons talk about themselves in different ways. For example, the Grand Orient of France, which is the name of the French Masonic Lodge, says that it is a philanthropic, philosophical, and progressive institution. Its purpose is the search for truth, the study of morality, and the practice of solidarity. It's completely not clear from that what exactly these people do or what they plan to do. The United Grand Lodge of England is the largest non-religious, non-political, fraternal, and charitable club. This lodge raises a great deal of money for charity. Freemasons do charity work even to this day. Where did Freemasonry come from? Freemasons themselves say that they trace their calendar back almost to Adam. They believe that it is a system of very ancient beliefs. It is a system of special relations of initiated persons who understand the philosophy and divine structure of the world. There is a myth about the builder Hiram. Well, if Adam is considered the first, then Hiram should probably be considered the second. He was the first builder, and he built the famous temple of King Solomon. And he had 3 disciples, and at a certain moment his disciples wanted to become masters. They started to ask him about the secrets. How to build temples, the secrets of the universe, or some secret words that he had to tell them. But Hiram basically told them nothing. And at some point, they killed him in that temple. Killed how? One of the disciples wounded him with a compass. Then Hiram ran to the exit of the temple, to one of the exits, but there was a second disciple standing there. And he was stabbed with a pointed needle. Then Hiram, bleeding, rushed to the third door, which faced the street from King Solomon's temple. There stood a third disciple, who struck him on the head with a wooden hammer, and killed him, and the hammer, the compass, and the socket have been the Masonic symbols ever since. They are interpreted differently, by the way. The compasses are magical objects that measure the limits of your knowledge, the degree of intimacy with God. And so is the angle. In general, all lodges interpret these symbols differently. Nevertheless, they are the indispensable symbols of Freemasonry. The disciples, after killing their teacher, were worried they would be caught. So they buried him far away from where anyone would be able to find him. But then King Solomon ordered to find Hiram's corpse. The grave was found by the acacia branch that was stuck in the ground. And since then, the acacia branch has been a symbol for the Freemasons. So basically, that's the legend of how the Freemasons came about. What does the word Freemason itself mean? It means freestone mason or a free stone worker. Where did it come from? As you know, Gothic churches in the Middle Ages were not built in a matter of years, but rather over the course of decades, sometimes even centuries. And so when the builders were constructing a Gothic temple, they needed somewhere to live, and they accordingly settled next to the temple and formed a fraternity. You know, in the Middle Ages, there was a system of guilds. One guild was the Brotherhood of the Jewelers, another guild was blacksmiths, and the third guild was the tanning of leather. and the ones we're talking about were the builders. Thus, Freestone Mason are Freemasons or free builders. So the origins of Freemasonry go back to the guild. It's pretty simple. Builders gathered, exchanging some secrets of their craft, some news. They had an understandable professional society rather close to other communities. And that's how the whole thing developed. We are not talking about any Kabbalistic philosophy yet. It's still a shop brotherhood. Then people here and there started joining in. There are no charters yet. There are no rituals. It's just people united by one cause, gathering, well, conventionally on Sundays. People from completely different crafts begin to join. Merchants, officials, who's around the builder's profession. And all this begins to change because a closed club, well, it can't discuss construction from morning till night. It is logical that people begin to discuss business, begin to discuss politics, begin to discuss the social structure, begin to discuss the church, their relationship with God. And in this way, little by little, this narrow professional society is transformed into a kind of philosophical circle. Most historians and most Freemasons will tell you that the beginning of modern Freemasonry is June 24, 1717, on St. John the Baptist Day. On that day, the four building lodges of London met at the Goose and Gridiron Tavern to form the premier Grand Lodge of London and Westminster. The 18th century was the dawn of Freemasonry. How is Freemasonry structured? At the moment, Masonic lodges differ from each other in rituals, number of degrees, rites, statutes, and so on. I have tried to combine everything I have found in the related literature, and here is a kind of extract. So what's a lodge? The word lodge comes from medieval times. It's derived from the word lodge, which means gatehouse or cottage. It was a structure near the construction site where workers could rest, store their tools, and gather in the afternoons. Nowadays, lodges are hunting cabins, or even fashionable houses in African territories where hunters come to rest after they shoot, or just people who want to stay in a fashionable hotel. So these days, lodge is a term from the field of hotel tourism. Accordingly, each lodge is characterized by a distinctive name, number, and location. The meetings take place in Masonic temples. Of course, these are no longer temples in the conventional sense. Although, if you look at the Great Lodge of England, look at how it looks like. It is quite a temple. As a matter of fact, several lodges could use the same place or the same temple to meet there. A Masonic lodge is, accordingly, a building in which several lodges meet. There are different number of rooms where different lodges may meet. The first lodges were named after the inns where the Freemasons held their meetings. The Crown, the Apple, the Goose and Gridiron, which I mentioned, and the Grey Pavine. According to various reports, there are 30,000 lodges around the world. It is quite a large organization, and different figures give different numbers of Freemasons on the entire planet, ranging from 5 to 10 million. We should immediately stipulate that the Masonic organization does not have a single center. That is, there is no main Mason of any kind, no Masonic Pope, and no main lodge either. All lodges operate independently of each other and are only answerable to their own officials whom they choose. Therefore, it makes no sense to speak of a worldwide Masonic conspiracy from this point of view, because the Masons are fragmented. If you look at the Grand Lodge of Russia and the Grand Lodge of England, they are certainly in contact with each other, but one is not subordinate to the other. Members of a Masonic lodge typically refer to one another as brothers. and Freemasonry is divided into several categories. The structure within Freemasonry consists of two main systems. The first system is called the Swedish system. It was proposed in the 1750s by Carl Friedrich Ecklof of Sweden. What does it consist of? According to this system, one indispensable condition that is imposed on the new member is that they adhere to the Christian faith. It is also very important when we talk about the Masonic conspiracy that later on in the 19th and in the 20th century there will be a discourse, even actually earlier than the 19th century, saying that Freemasons worship Satan or that they are atheists. No, the first prerequisite for being accepted as a Freemason is, according to the Swedish system, that you have a Christian faith. In the English system, it is that you have any faith. The Freemasons have always been a very flexible organization, and their attitudes towards different religions and groups of people have changed over time. For example, at first they did not accept Muslims as Freemasons. Women were not accepted into Freemasons, and people of color other than white were not accepted in Freemasonry. However, if you go to the Great Lodge of England website, you will see that they now accept people of all religions and backgrounds. According to the English system of Freemasonry, which is the basis for all other Freemasonry organizations, it is enough for those who want to join to admit their belonging to a particular religion. In other words, it is an organization that is exclusively for people who believe in God. There is no atheism or Satanism allowed from the very beginning. There are only 3 degrees of seniority in the English system: apprentice, journeyman, and master. In the Swedish system, there are 11 degrees. Some lodges have even more complicated systems. We'll talk about what was going on in the 18th century. That's an even more complicated system. They had something that's even harder to wrap your head around. According to the Swedish system, the Grand Master is given the 11th degree and is abbreviated as V asterisk asterisk V asterisk. Translated from Latin, means the deputy of the wisest Solomon. The same Solomon to whom Hiram built the temple. The 3 dots are also a symbol which Freemasons interpret as the union of opposites in the highest harmony. Freemasonry is very confusing, and everything that is built on symbols and secret signs, which I will tell you about in a moment. The first 3 initiate degrees in Freemasonry are called the Blue Lodge degrees. These are the foundation of Freemasonry. In order to become a member of other Masonic organizations, such as the York Rite or the Scottish Rite, you must first become a Master Mason and remain a member of a Blue Lodge. Some Masons may receive up to 32 degrees. For example, in the Scottish Rite, that is, what is meant by a degree? With each degree you become more enlightened and therefore more powerful. And on the very last floors you even know the secret name of God. So everything, as you can see, is mixed up in a deep philosophy with alchemy added later on. And the whole story. Well, look, people have this tendency to flock. A man is always attracted to this feeling, wow, I'm in a secret society. There are soccer fans, there are music fans, there are reenactment circles, and there are societies, right? There are those at universities, there are secret societies. A person is always attracted to, you can't even tell anybody about art. So of course there is always this thick veil of secrecy around Freemasons. And then this mystery naturally gives rise to the suspicion that the Freemasons secretly run everything here. What else is characteristic of Freemasonry? Well, first of all, symbolism, right? I started to tell you about the angle piece. I told you about the angle piece. I told you about the compass. What are the most common symbols of Freemasonry? Well, for example, if you see one of these, it means the sun or an all-seeing eye. The ruler and plumb line are symbols which Freemasons interpret as the equality of estates. The angle gauge is a symbol of justice. The compasses are the symbol of the public. The square means, according to some Masonic interpretations, conscience. The common stone is crude morality. The cubic stone is morality processed. The hammer is a symbol of power. The blade is indulgence for the weakness of people and an attitude of severity to oneself. The acacia branch is immortality. Yes, you remember. It was stuck on the master's grave. The coffin, skull, and bones are symbols of contempt for death and sorrow for the disappearance of truth. You see, in the eyes of these skulls lies that sadness. You can see it with the naked eye. The round Masonic hat is a symbol of liberty. The dagger is the symbol of preference for death. The most common Freemason seal is a circle with two intersecting equilateral triangles, one pointing up and the other down. This is the Order's Great Seal. There are simpler seals such as the six-pointed star and, of course, the secret signs. So the handshake is Masonic, when you greet a person and touch their hand with your thumb. I have not been shaken by Freemasons. I cannot say whether it is so or not. Rings. Rings with the seals of Freemasons so that Freemasons can recognize each other. Secret password words so that a person can enter the room, hear the password word, and realize that there are Freemasons here. And here's this gesture. The hand behind the back. This means that the man has undergone the rite of Freemasonry and has taken the Masonic oaths with all his heart. This comes from the Bible. And he said unto him, put your hand into your bosom. And he put his hand behind his back, and he took it out of his bosom, and his hand became white and leprous. And then he said to him again, put your hand behind your back. And he took it out of his bosom, and it became like his body again. In the biblical verses, the heart. That is the heart, that is the sinus, symbolizes man himself, that is his essence. If you look, you'll see that Napoleon is very often portrayed in pictures like this. Kutuzov, Kerensky, the man who led the provisional government in 1917. Kutuzov was a Freemason, Kerensky was a Freemason. Napoleon was very close to Freemasonry, and this is certainly a Masonic sign. Well, frankly, Stalin liked to do that too, but I honestly don't believe that Stalin was a Freemason. Yeah. But nevertheless, it is considered one of the main Masonic symbols. So, the heyday of Freemasonry is the 18th century. Here, for the first time, begins to sound the legend not only of Solomon's Temple, but also that the Freemasons are nothing but a new iteration of the two old orders. The first order is the Order of the Templars. The Templars absorbed the wisdom of the East and the mystical secrets of Judaism during the Crusades. They learned how to turn lead into gold, and so on and so forth. Then Philip the Beautiful, as you might know, defeated these Templars. Some of them fled to Portugal, some, a significant part, to Scotland. And there is a Scottish Masonic charter. This is the legend that went to the Templars, who passed their knowledge on. The second story is about the German order of the Rosicrucians. Some of the Templars again fled to Germany. There they passed on their knowledge through the generations, and now the Rosicrucians, with their treatises, carry this secret philosophical knowledge. And now the Templars and the Rosicrucians, all this is combined in Freemasonry. That is, the Freemasons in this way regendering themselves, that we are not just circles of freethinkers. What happens in the 18th century? This is the Age of Enlightenment. These are the great philosophers. Well, look, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Franklin, Jefferson, Locke. These are the people who begin. Well, not to rule the historical process yet, but in any case, influence it very strongly. It is they who actually prepare the French Revolution by their writings. And so all of them, some of them, most of them are Freemasons or people close to Freemasons or people close to Freemasonry. And here is where Freemasonry becomes fashionable. I will dare say it, the elite comes to Freemasonry. Let's agree from the start that, of course, anyone can join the Freemasons. But this is an elite group. And, of course, in an elite group, where does this conspiracy theory come from? Because businessmen join the Freemasons, politicians join, people who are close to royalty join. The offspring join. That is, the royal heirs, the sovereigns of tomorrow. All of them join Masonic societies. Well, it's obvious, right? When you sit in a secret club with only the initiated, and here is the intellectual elite. Here then is Walter, here. Here is some prince of blood here, then are some rich merchants. Obviously, besides self-improvement and philosophy, you start talking about politics, you start talking about business. So here's all the talk about. The Freemasons are such harmless philosophers. Well, of course not. Of course, when there is a closed society, of course, there starts talking about the political and government system. There are things that are narrowly focused, like lobbying or career advancement. These things are harmless enough. But obviously, when the king is informed that his heir has joined a Masonic lodge, and it is unclear what they are discussing, maybe they are discussing Kubi Diet, these rumors about the Freemasons begin to swirl. They begin to surround the Freemasons with such a mystical veil, dangerous to the state, because something is probably wrong there. And so, in principle, the Great French Revolution contributes greatly to this. It is the Freemasons who will be accused of preparing revolutions all over Europe to execute all kings on the scaffold and change the whole state system throughout the world. At the same time, in addition to the great philosophers of the Enlightenment, a number of other characters appear in Freemasonry. One of them is Martinez de Pasquale, who not only reinterpreted the Masonic rites, but he made them very complicated. He also created an order called the Masonic Elect Cohen Knights. Who is a Cohen? Cohen is a member of Cohen class, a class of priests in Judaism. This connection of Freemasonry and Judaism, it then will fit very well into the Russian Black Hundreds movement, where all these words about the Jewish Masons will come from. That means the Jews have adopted Freemasonry, and the Russian man wants to deprive him of his native Russian land. Here, in fact, is the connection. It begins here. Pasquale makes Freemasonry very complicated. At some point, the Knights, Masons become almost a parallel order altogether. The admission procedure becomes more complicated. At the highest levels of Freemasonry, people read Psalms for 6 hours, and one of the famous mystics of the time, philosophers of the time, Saint Martin, who almost died during the French Revolution, he meets with Pasquale. They at some point communicate very closely.
And Saint Martin even asked him once,
Is reading Psalms for 6 hours to know our Lord a prerequisite? Pasquale told him that it was not a prerequisite, but I have nothing else to offer you. Everything begins to fall into alchemy, into secret rituals. There's talk of a philosopher's stone again. It's all incredibly fashionable. Pasquale creates a lodge in Bordeaux, in Montpellier, in Paris. These are the kind of super closed clubs that have several more degrees. I didn't write it all out because there's 1 degree, a 2nd degree, a 3rd degree, a 4th degree. That is all. This is built in such a superstructure over the Masonic movement. And again, there are representatives of elite. Again, there are rumors that here are rulers of fortune, that these people rule the state. Everyone wants to get there. Pasquale's death marks the emergence of mysticism, alchemy, and other similar topics in Freemasonry. Of course, Joseph Balsamo, who is better known as Count Cagliostro. He's also a figure. A mystic, a magician, a philosopher, a visionary. You may have even seen him in a Soviet movie where he was one of the main characters. He's a common swindler. Well, no, not a common one. How's that? Well, he was not an ordinary crook, I would say. He was indeed an extraordinary crook. The man was born. Very briefly, the man was born in Italy. His name was Joseph Balsamo. At a certain point, he realized that he wouldn't make a fortune through righteous work, so he began to engage in the business of selling fake documents and gems. Then he married a very beautiful woman whose name was Lorenza. His Balsamo's aunt dies. He takes her last name. It's much more euphonious, Cagliostro. And somewhere later, he calls himself a count. Obviously, he was no count, but in 18th century Italy is a mess, to put it mildly. This is a fragmented country, so you could draw counts as many as you like. He goes to London. He flees, to be exact, because he was caught for counterfeiting and almost put on trial. He flees to London with his wife. There he tries to engage in petty fraud. Even ends up in debtor's prison. His wife negotiated with the local priest and he was released from jail. In general, his relationship with his wife was, to put it mildly, not good. That is, they believed that he corrupted her. He almost rented her out to important people in order to get closer to them. And at the end of her life, she testified against him in court. Cagliostro, after some time, returns to England as a great magician. He guesses the numbers of lottery tickets, he heals people, he tells everyone that he has lived 300 or 500 years and has seen the Egyptian pyramid. He makes his servants lie that they have been serving him for 4 centuries. He's immortal. He's covered in rings with huge stones which he makes himself, and he gives them out to everyone and says, it's a trinket, it's worth half of London there. It's all fake, but nevertheless, he makes some money. But most importantly, he earns a reputation. Next, with this reputation, he travels around Europe, France, Poland, Courland, and then there's Petersburg. This is the time of Catherine the Great in Petersburg. He is greeted well enough. He already arrives in great glory. Catherine favors him. Why? Because Potemkin, then Catherine the Great's lover, favors him. And why does Potemkin favor him? Because he begins a relationship with Cagliostro's wife Lorenza. And he showered them with jewels, and Cagliostro does 2 things. First, it's a historical myth, but a lot of people write about him that he said to Potemkin, my lordship, I'm just going to show you some magic now. You then give me a sack of gold there and I'll triple it. And take 1/3 of the triple. And really he does something like that. The gold gets bigger. He takes 1/3 of it. Maybe he took 1/3 of the real gold for himself and then he gave some fake gold back to Potemkin. Everyone is delighted. He predicts the fate, he guesses, he tells Catherine the Great that she will be the greatest queen in the history of Russia. Then he makes a mistake. He heals a dead baby, and the family whose baby died is thrilled, shedding tears, not knowing how to thank Cagliostro. And at some point, the midwives realize that it is a substitute. He has replaced the dead baby with a live one. This is reported to Potemkin. Potemkin wags his finger at him. Here too, legend has it that the story reaches Catherine the Great, that Cagliostro's wife has a relationship with Potemkin, and Cagliostro is banished from Russia. Moreover, the Spanish ambassador's paper came, which said that Cagliostro, he lied and said he served in the Spanish army, that he didn't serve in any army, and so on. Well, anyway, Cagliostro ran away. I won't tell you further. You'll see for yourselves. In France, he was mixed up in a story with the Queen's necklace, which was allegedly prepared for Marie Antoinette. Anyway, he ends his days badly. In Italy, they imprison him in a dungeon where the entrance is on the top of the roof so he can't get out. His wife testifies against him. His wife is exiled to a convent and there she dies. And he dies sometime later in this prison. Legend has it that he didn't die himself, but that he was poisoned. But he presented himself as a Freemason everywhere. He spoke about it all the time. And according to one account, he was initiated into an English lodge and then a French lodge. Here is such a character. That is, it's clear that where there is mystery and mysticism, there are always a lot of fraudsters. But let's return to Russia. The Masons first appeared in Russia, according to legend, during the time of Peter the Great. In fact, Peter is said to have been the very first Mason. When he went to Europe to learn various crafts, it is rumored that he was initiated into the Masons. The great English architect Wren is said to have initiated him into the Masons. Of course, this is just a legend and there is no confirmation of it. But nevertheless, these free stone masons, they appear under Peter the Great. Then under Anne, their numbers begin to grow. And under Catherine the Great, it all really takes off because such nobles as Elegin, for example, headed the Russian Masonic lodge. At first, Catherine the Great favored the Masons. By 1787, there were 145 Masonic lodges in Russia. That's a lot. They were found not only in Petersburg and Moscow, but also in the army, navy, and provinces. In other words, there was a quite extensive Masonic system. The two main centers were St. Petersburg and Moscow. At first, Catherine the Great treated this with indulgence. People gathered. Well, Elegin was our man in general. He headed the lodge there. Some people gathered, so they discussed some philosophical treatises there. At that moment, Catherine was also fond of philosophical treatises. She corresponded with Voltaire, she read Montesquieu. And the same thing happened here. Well, that's good. That's fine. But first, Catherine is informed that, Mother, your heir Paul is a Freemason. And this is the first alarm signal. The heir. What the Freemasons are saying to him is unclear. Tomorrow, there will be a palace coup. Catherine remembers it very well. She herself led Russia on the Guards' bayonets. What will prevent Paul from doing it? Nothing will prevent him. But nevertheless, the Freemasons always considered and swore an oath, with their Masonic principles being secondary to their loyalty to the sovereign and the fatherland. And this is very important. When Catherine the Great began her persecutions, she called up Elegin and talked to the other Masons. They said, we take an oath first and foremost to the true sovereign of Russia. And there arose a joke. Which one? She flashed. Isn't it my dead husband, you mean? And they say, no, we mean the one who is now on the throne. So the persecution of the Masons begins. Here is also the story of Bazanov, who dotted Saracino with Masonic sign. Here is also the story of Novikov. Novikov was a Russian enlightener and philosopher who had a printing house in Moscow. He was engaged in charity and built stone houses for peasants. At the beginning of his reign, he had a light satirical pique with the empress. However, at the end of his reign, he was accused of almost a coup d'etat. The governor general of Moscow summoned him and said, I have found this book of Masonic literature and this cipher. You print this literature and correspond with the French Mason. Here is the table of contents. It was actually a cipher. Well, there's a bunch, horribly. They seem funny moments, but they're moments that are disastrous. Novikov, already an old man, is dragged out by a hussar platoon, taken to Schlüsselburg, and there even the court opinion sounds dubious. We have not proved anything, but we know that he did something awful. And Catherine dies Paul I on the first day of his reign, releases Novikov. And by the way, about that too, look how the Masons know how to get their own out. In general, Catherine begins to persecute the Freemasons. The French Revolution succeeded because it is quite clear that her yesterday's friends, Voltaire and Montesquieu, are free thinkers now. It was they who prepared the French Revolution. Marie Antoinette was executed. The king was executed. Do you want me to have the same thing happen to me? And all of a sudden, all these Masonic circles start getting shut down, but there's no repression, right? Let's also stand on the side of historical justice. They're simply told, stop playing this game because it will not do any good. But, of course, no one stops playing the game. There are fewer lodges, but they become more secretive. And, in fact, in general, Catherine is the first such beater of the Freemasons in Russia. Let's go back to France for a moment. The Great French Revolution, as I told you, was prepared by the Great Enlighteners, right? And when the massacre in Paris begins, the monarchs of Europe look on in horror. And there is a talk of these French Masons. They were the ones who prepared the revolution. They sat in secret circles all over Europe. Next will be the same in Austria, in Germany, in Italy, in Russia. Everywhere there will be this world Masonic revolution to overthrow the rightful sovereigns and enthrone, therefore, the Freemasons or their henchmen. And this is when rumors of a worldwide Masonic conspiracy begin to circulate. This is because there are also Americans on the other side of the ocean. George Washington is the most famous Freemason. Anyway, the French Revolution is one of the peak points where it is said that the Freemasons are terrible conspirators. Here, they just brought down the French dynasty. What happens after the Great French Revolution? You know, right? Napoleon Bonaparte appears in France sometime later and is considered by many to be a Freemason. Many do not consider him a Freemason, but he is considered a man close to Freemasonry. And all of his brothers were definitely Freemasons. What's going on in Russia? Well, Catherine the Great started to crack down on the Freemasons, but then she died. Her son, Paul the First, became the next ruler, and he was a Freemason himself. But he didn't rule for very long because he was killed. Then Alexander the First came into power, and he was much more liberal. He favored the Freemasons. A lot of Russian officers were Freemasons, including Kutuzov. He joined the Freemasons because, as he said himself, he wanted to curb the flesh. But he remained the bacchanal for the rest of his life, and Freemasonry didn't help him at all. According to some rumors, Suvorov was a Freemason. That is, when the war with Napoleon begins, both sides are Freemason, and on this side are Freemasons. And there is a very interesting relationship there, that when the Russians took the French prisoner, the French showed them secret signs that we are Freemasons too. And these prisoners were treated differently. And in fact, nothing happened to the Masons. They were favored, they gathered, and so on and so forth. But closer to the 20s, Alexander goes to Orthodoxy. The elder Photius appears, and the Tsar's attitude towards the Masons changes. Once again, secret societies are being blamed for conspiracies everywhere. And in 1822, Alexander decreed that Freemasonry was prohibited in Russia. All secret societies in general are banned, and in general, on the Senate Square among the Decembrists and around Pushkin, there will be a mass of Freemasons. And in Senate Square, the Freemasons will also come out, and they will certainly be reminded of this. One of the interesting things is that the Alexander column in St. Petersburg has an all-seeing eye on it. Alexander I, of course, knew about it. This is a Masonic symbol that they couldn't install just like that, like just put the plaque there. Tsar Nicholas, who came to the throne after the murder of Alexander I, allowed this plaque because he knew about the contribution of Freemasons. Russian officers, their enormous contribution to the victory over Napoleon. It's no coincidence that this symbol is on the Alexander pillar. On the Kazan Cathedral, you will see these rays, and you will see the eye, which is also a Masonic symbol. Kutuzov was also buried with Masonic rites. Despite the fact that they are banned, they somehow exist. And then the next dawn of Freemasonry is 1905. Masonic societies again appear, Masonic action begins. And where there is action, there is opposition. There are the Black Hundreds, the Union of Michael, the Archangel. I told you about the Masonic elect Cohen Knights, which were an order in the 18th century. This is where the trail is blazed. There's a long-standing myth in the Russian nationalist movement that the Freemasons lead Nicholas II to death, surrounded him with spies, and brought down the great Russian Empire. And Kerensky, in fact, as we recall from The Secret Science, was indeed a Freemason. Here's the proof. Well, it's clear that it wasn't just the Freemasons. The reasons for the revolution are completely different. If it was only the Freemasons, they would have been just one of the microscopic threats to the Russian Tsarism. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Freemasons come back onto the scene. Again, there are nobles. Again, there are industrialists. That is, the Freemasons have an international connection with the French Lodge mostly, but also with the English Lodge. And the Freemasons are present in the Russian Empire. And in general, they're not threatened by anything. In modern Russia, Freemasonry is also present. There's a great lodge of Russia, which is made up of different lodges. The Grand Masonic Lodge of Russia was established in 1995. It has links with more than 100 other lodges in the world. There were originally 4 Masonic lodges in our country, 2 in Moscow and 1 each in St. Petersburg and Voronezh. However, their number is rapidly increasing. And a year after the founding of the Grand Masonic Lodge of Russia in St. Petersburg, there are 3 more Masonic lodges in Moscow. Now, about the conspiracy. What is this Masonic worldwide conspiracy? Well, as I have already told you, as soon as the elite comes into the movement, and Freemasonry was not a movement for ordinary people, but a movement in general. for the elite's secret and parallel connections begin at once, unknown to anyone. These myths and legends begin to swirl. Somewhere, of course, they are not myths. Lobbyism, the promotion of one's own interests and state policy. The great French foreign minister Talleyrand was a Freemason. A book by the Frenchman Leo Taxil did a lot to further the theory of the worldwide Masonic conspiracy. It is called The Devil in the 19th Century. It has all the juicy details that conspiracy theorists love. The Freemasons, like the Templars, worship Baphomet, hold human sacrifices, eat babies, drink blood, and rule the world through connections with big bankers, industrialists, and politicians. The book contains the revelations of a certain Miss Diane Vaughan, who was a Masonic woman, but then she repented and in fact told everything that goes on in French Freemasonry. Later, Leo Taxil admitted that the whole thing was a hoax. He had made it up. The woman he showed under the name of Diane Vaughan was not a Freemason at all, but just an ordinary woman with whom he had made a deal. But you understand that conspiracy is a thing that requires no practical proof. So smart people said, well, of course he said it was a hoax. But we understand he was pressured, he was forced to say, to, cover it up like that. There's no smoke without fire. And there are things that for some reason few people know about now. But this was the biggest scandal of the 20th century related to the Masons. I will tell you about the Masonic Lodge in Italy, which was called the P2, or Propaganda du Lodge. And that's where it was a really serious mess. What happened? The Lodge Propaganda du, or the Lodge 2, has been known since the end of the 19th century. It functioned as the Masonic Lodge of Italy until 1976. It was one of the Masonic lodges where Masons discussed philosophy and the meanings of being, among other things. But then a man named Licio Gelli comes along. He's a financier, an entrepreneur, a man who has something to do with banks, newspapers, and writing. He's even a philosopher. This is a man of remarkable destiny. He was born in Italy, and in the mid-1930s he went to Spain to join the Falangist movement led by Francisco Franco to fight the communists. After defeating the communists, he returned to Italy, became a fascist, and was close to Mussolini. And after the defeat of Hitler's Germany and the fascists in Italy, he nevertheless stayed inside the country. He began to engage in cloth production and became rich rather quickly. In 1976, he joined the two Masonic lodges and began to grow in influence. He began to surround himself with important people and make strong and important acquaintances. Eventually, the Grand Master of Italy expelled him from the lodge. In response, Licio Gelli threatens to compromise him, and the lodge reinstates him. With the passage of time, Licio Gelli becomes head of the two lodges. This is how it exists until the year 80. At some point, I don't remember if it was 78 or 80, they had another falling out with the Grand Master, and the two lodge was expelled from the Masonic movement. It becomes a wild lodge. What is a wild lodge? It is a lodge that is not recognized by the main lodge of the country. The main provincial lodge. No one recognizes them. They call themselves Freemasons, but the main movement does not hold them to be Freemasons. So this two lodge starts to gain a lot of popularity. And at some point in 1980, Licio Gelli, who was a very public person, gave an interview. And among other things, he said, I have a very important influence in the Masons, a very strong influence. Everybody knows me. I'm a pretty serious Freemason. One morning, the police searched his villa as part of a different financial investigation and found 30 notebooks full of files on all the members of Duke. This dossier was immediately taken to the Prime Minister of Italy. It turned out that this lodge had about 70 branches all over Italy. half of the government was in debt. They had bankers, intelligence officers, the Deputy Minister of Defense. They controlled 4 major newspapers, 2 major publishing houses. That's where Berlusconi and his comrades in future politics first appeared. In other words, the police had uncovered the structure that ruled all of Italy. There are ties to the Vatican and the Vatican Bank, the famous case of how they laundered money through the Vatican Bank. Mafia connections. The suspicion that Licio Gelli was involved or was somehow involved in the assassination of Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro, who was shot by the Red Brigades. One of the worst moments in Italian history, in the history of terrorism. He was, according to the investigation, involved in and delayed the investigation of the attack in Bologna when 200 people were wounded and 80 were killed. The crime was attributed to the far-right Nargai, and it is still unclear whether it was the NER or not. At that moment, the fight against communism was going on in Europe, the opposition to the Soviet Union. And then there is the version that Licio Gelli was sponsored by the CIA and NATO to teach the fascists to shoot communists and people close to them all over Italy. Anyway, a wild scandal ensues, and the government resigns, an investigation begins, and it doesn't really lead to anything, because then a series of murders begin. One of the bankers is killed in an American prison. Journalists are shot, someone is poisoned. That is, this whole story, it somehow goes on the brakes and disappears. And what's more, Licio Gelli will then be still going to jail for being connected to the bankruptcy of the Ambrosiano Bank, and nothing further will happen. He will flee to Switzerland, where he will be caught. He will bribe the guards and go to Latin America. And there, again, the connection with two. There were a lot of Latin American dictators in two. And Licio Gelli had various passports from different countries. Anyway, long story short, he dies in 2015 in his villa as a rich man. This is practically yesterday, 2015. He dies at the age of 94. He didn't get anything. No Freemasons were convicted. But nevertheless, the Two Lodge was absolutely guaranteed to run the Italian economy, was linked to the mafia, influenced politics, and influenced finances. So when we talk about the Masonic conspiracy, this was a specific conspiracy of a secret society. There are more strings attached to the conspiracy, like their involvement in the attempted fascist coup in 1970. That is when we say that such ridiculous people in white gloves and sheepskin aprons with skulls are studying philosophy. Someone is studying philosophy, my friends, and someone is making money and career at the same time. As a final note, let's talk about some of the famous Freemasons that we know about. Mozart was a Freemason, as was Giuseppe Garibaldi, one of the leaders of the National Liberation Movement in Italy. All 4 of Napoleon's brothers were Freemasons, as was Rudyard Kipling, the great English writer. Walter was a Freemason, as was Casanova, as I've already told you. Kutuzov was a Freemason, as was Novikov. Ivan Petrovich Turgenev, the director of the Moscow University, was known in small circles as the founder of the first Masonic lodge in Simbirsk, and was founded in 1784. Griboyedov was a member of the largest lodge. Peter Chadayev joined the Freemasons in 1814. And finally, Anders Breivik, the famous mass murderer, was also an open Freemason who opposed the Freemasons. Well, as I mentioned, there was persecution of the Freemasons. Hitler didn't like the Freemasons. He believed they were plotting against him, and he quite clearly regarded them as enemies of the Nazi regime. Hitler ordered the execution of all known Freemasons, and during World War II, it's estimated that up to 200,000 Freemasons were murdered. In the Soviet Union, it was clear that all secret organizations were illegal, and there could be no Freemason. Saddam Hussein made Freemasonry illegal in 80. He thought they were promoting Zionism, and of course that's what they wanted to do, overthrow Saddam Hussein. Although Muslims are now allowed to be Freemasons, only a few Muslim nations recognize and allow them. These are Turkey, Morocco, Malaysia, and Lebanon. The Catholic Church is the only organization that forbids Freemasons to be members. That's a paradox too, isn't it? The Freemasons say, we only accept those who believe in God, and the Catholic Church says, we do not recognize you. So that was a brief excursion into the history of Freemasonry. It's an interesting movement, a movement shrouded in mysticism, a movement that is suspected of being a world government. Not without that, as you and I have heard, somewhere they were quite the local government. Obviously, you can't tell everything in a little over an hour, but these are the basic things I know about Freemasonry, and now you do too. Here, take another look at that skull. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel and stay with us. Thank you.